Star Trek Generations is the reason I do what I do. I had seen bad movies before this one, but this was the first film that ever got a confused Matthew reaction from me. When it was over, all I wanted were answers. And not answers to the many logical questions raised in this film. Answers to questions like, how did this happen? Who's responsible for this travesty? Whose stupid idea was this? How do you pitch a movie like this to a studio, end up with this movie as your final draft, and have both the writer and the studio say, yeah, that sounds great. Let's make that. The year was 1994. I was 13, and at the time, a huge Next Generation fan. I was very confident that this film would be good, not only because it was their first feature film, but also because they had 6 original films to study, find out what works and what doesn't. Little did I know that the last thing anyone was concerned with when writing this movie was writing a movie. But we'll get to that soon enough. Now, to be as fair as possible, this movie opens very strong. We come into the film to find Captain Kirk being given a tour of the new Enterprise, which is now under the command of Cameron from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Kirk has been in retirement for some years now and is missing his days as captain. Eventually he meets up with Chekhov and Scotty, who were also here to endorse the new Enterprise. This scene was originally written to have Kirk with Spock and Bones, but Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley didn't want anything to do with this movie. They both felt that they had said their goodbyes in Star Trek VI, and didn't want to make an appearance in a film just for the sake of making an appearance in a film. If only everyone had such convictions. So the tour goes on, and eventually the Enterprise B takes a short voyage around the solar system. Everything about this opening scene works. The chemistry between these larger-than-life characters is perfectly intact here. There are some genuinely funny moments, and they even managed to write everyone in character.
Captain, it may be possible to simulate a torpedo blast using a resonance burst from the main deflector dish.
Okay, except for that. Scotty doesn't talk like that. LaForge talks like that, but not Scotty. Nevertheless, this was a great opening scene that reminds you of the good times and will eventually make you wish the first 10 minutes was the whole movie. Actually, I recommend for anyone that hasn't seen this film that you just watch this opening scene and then turn the damn thing off, because this is the only part of the film that's worth anything. So as the tour goes on, the Enterprise picks up a distress call from 2 ships carrying Elorian refugees. The Elorians, who are on the verge of extinction after being attacked by the Borg, are now on their way to Earth. Now, granted, they get the timeline all wrong here, as no one in the Federation is supposed to have heard of the Borg for many years after this, but the whole opening is so solid that it hardly matters. The new captain of the Enterprise B procrastinates over taking action. The Enterprise B isn't ready to go into action yet, and he belabors on deciding what to do. And all the while, Kirk looks on from his guest's chair, and you can just tell he can't wait to jump into action here. This was handled and executed beautifully. It's a new and interesting position for Kirk to be in, and the tension here is believable and riveting. I don't want to go on and on about this, but again, if they had somehow managed to make this the whole movie, they might have had something here. Anyway, eventually Kirk takes action and orders the Enterprise to go in and rescue the ships. They come to find that both ships are stuck in an energy ribbon. The Enterprise enters the ribbon and begins beaming survivors over, but the ribbon starts messing their ship up too. As the Enterprise B has no tractor beam or photon torpedoes yet, they have to activate a resonance pulse in order to escape. Long story short, Kirk runs down to Deck 15 and activates the pulse, but just as they're about to escape, an energy stream slams into Deck 15 and apparently kills Captain Kirk. Again, it's not the best the original series cast has to offer, but it was an excellent part of this movie. And then the film transitions over to the Next Generation crew, and watch how fast everything changes from exciting and riveting to dull and lifeless when this happens. As soon as we catch up with the crew of the Enterprise D, the writers, from here on out, proceed with the following strategy. We got them all on screen, now let's quietly run out the clock. You can tell this strategy is in play from the unfathomable amount of time spent in this film with no one saying or doing anything. But here, we begin with the crew of the Enterprise D playing around on the holodeck. This has got to be the most boring holodeck program ever to be featured in Star Trek, and it's the way they decided to open their first feature film. They're all confined on this ugly little boat in a setting that is as far removed from the rest of this film as you can possibly get. Now, what would possess these people to run such a terrible program? Well, it turns out that Worf, I hate Worf, is being promoted and that this is his ceremony. Yeah, don't bother giving him a Klingon setting for this, you guys. This is all about you. Now, as we all know, Worf's character exists to do one of two things: either pontificate or to be publicly humiliated at every opportunity. Well, as there's nothing to pontificate about in this scene, looks like we're in for the latter.
Computer, remove the flag!
Number one, that's retract plank, not remove plank.
Of course, sir. Sorry!
That's not funny. Whose stupid idea was it to put this in the film? It's not funny. Incidentally, during the writing process, Michael Dorn, who plays Worf, had a 10-minute argument with Rick Berman to try and get this garbage out of the movie. Why? Well, in Michael Dorn's own words, and I quote, "I just didn't think it was funny." Should have held out longer, Mike. Anyway, two other things happen in this scene. Picard gets some news that upsets him and he goes away, and Data pushes Beverly over the side of the ship. The reason he does this is that he was trying to understand humor, and Beverly encouraged him to do something spontaneous. Now, one of the biggest problems I had with this film, as well as the Next Generation film franchise in general, is that unlike the originals, the Next Generation films are not universally accessible. There is just nothing here for anyone who hasn't seen the Next Generation. So I could really only judge this scene based upon what I knew of the series, and well, Data just wouldn't do something like this. He had learned so much about humanity in the 7 years he had been around them that this kind of misunderstanding just wouldn't happen at this point. But they needed to set up Data getting his emotion chip, so it does. Meanwhile, the Enterprise gets a distress call from the Amagosa Observatory, which has apparently been attacked. They come to find that there are only 5 life signs left on the station out of the 15 that were there. So Picard orders an away team to go down and investigate. Now, what they're investigating here, I have absolutely no idea. If there were still enemy combatants down there, they should have been able to pick up their life signs just like they did the 5 survivors. So all they really need to do is transport the survivors to sickbay and call it a day. There is no reason for anyone to go down there, but remember, this thing has to be feature length, so they have to take every opportunity they can to run out the clock. I'm serious. Look how much time they managed to suck dry out of this scene. Anyway, after meandering around the observatory and wasting the audience's time, they eventually come to find that the station was attacked by Romulans, which never amounts to anything. Meanwhile, Geordi discusses Data's out-of-character moment with him when Data up and decides to stick in his emotion chip. Now again, this movie was made only for Next Generation fans, and the one thing TNG fans have been waiting for is Data realizing his dream of having emotions and becoming more human. So this is the moment we've all been waiting for. Man, I'll bet all of Data's friends are just going to be ecstatic for him about this.
Because I have had little experience with emotion, I am unable to articulate the sensation.
Emotion?
I'll explain later.
Ooh. Well, it looks like he hates it.
It looks like he hates it? Data finally has emotions, and that's all you have to say? It looks like he hates it? Data has emotions. Why does no one around him care about this? It's his lifelong ambition fulfilled. Incidentally, it looks like he hates it is about the biggest reaction Data gets from his friends. Why did they give Data emotions if they weren't going to do anything with it? Oh well, maybe all of Data's friends are apathetic towards his lifelong dream realized, but I'm sure the scenes portraying Data's emotions will be handled with heart, dignity, and respect for the character.
Mr. Tricorder.
Okay, here's my theory about what you just saw. Someone kidnapped Brent Spiner during the shooting of this film, and the writers created a hybrid of Jerry Lewis, Carrot Top, Sean Hayes, Jim Carrey, and Robin Williams and Jar Jar Binks to play the role of Data from this point on. Dude, fuck you. So the Enterprise crew eventually learns that the Romulans who attacked the station were scanning for a compound called trilithium, which could theoretically stop all fusion within a star. So Data and Geordi go over to the observatory and scan for trilithium themselves. They eventually discover a hidden door where apparently someone was working on the trilithium in secret. Because I'm sure, on a station of 19 people, no one is ever going to notice this huge, loud, slow-moving door opening every time he needs to work. Anyway, so they discover the trilithium weapon when Soren, one of the survivors of the Romulan attack, approaches them. Eventually Soren attacks Geordi, but Data's Robin Williams chip acts up again, and he's too scared to help him. Meanwhile, back on the ship, we find Picard thumbing through an old photo album when Deanna the vacuum comes in and tries to talk about what's bothering him. The scene that follows is slow-going and frustrating, as everything the scene is about is completely unrelated to the rest of the film. Picard's brother and nephew apparently burned to death in a fire, and Picard is now grieving. Well, that's fine, except we've got a movie to get on with. You can't just stop the plot for 5 minutes to let us know how sad Picard is. Just to let you know how far removed the issue of Picard's family dying is from the rest of the film, this is the first time it's being brought up, at the beginning of the film. And after this scene, it will never come up again. Ever. Not even in the slightest bit until the end of the film. I mean, did they honestly think there weren't more relevant things we could have been watching at this point? Or even forget relevance, how about something a little more exciting? I just couldn't believe how slow and meandering this scene was. It's your first feature film and this is the best idea you could come up with? Having Picard sit at his desk and cry? And you know what the real pity about this is? Star Trek Generations was the most in character these people have ever been written in a film, and it was here, right here, that it hit me like a sack of bricks falling on my head. Star Trek The Next Generation just isn't very well suited for a film. The original cast takes to the big screen like a Voyager staff writer to bad plot devices, but where the Next Generation cast is concerned, it's just really hard to give these people things to do that's above and beyond television. When you write them in character, you get exactly what this movie was. An episode. And a bad episode at that. You can spend an hour on television brooding over an issue like Picard's family dying. You can't do that in a film. The peaks and valleys you have to hit in a film are completely different than those on television. It's a different entity altogether. And as Rick Berman, Brannon Braga, and Ronald D. Moore had no experience writing a film at this point, it makes me wonder why they didn't just bring someone in who did. There would have been no shame in that. If you don't know how to do this, you don't know how to do this. But still, the film plods along. As soon as Picard is done crying, the Amagosa star suddenly goes dark. Apparently someone on the station launched the trilithium weapon, and the collapse produced a shockwave that's about to kick the Enterprise ass. They try to beam Data and Geordi back, but can't do it because there's a dampening field in operation. But that's okay, because the Captain Man said, "I'm sending in more men." So a rescue team beams over to find Data and Geordi. A firefight ensues, and finally a Klingon ship comes and transports Soren and Geordi aboard. The rest of the officers beam back to the Enterprise and they leave just before the station is destroyed. So back on the ship, we get yet another example of the writers trying to force-feed every main character with screen time. We learn that Soren is an Elorian and that he was on the ship that Kirk saved 75 years ago. The Elorians live a really, really long time. And we also learn that Guinan was on that very ship. As soon as this is learned, Picard goes to question Guinan about this event. Now, there are two major problems with this scene. First, what makes any of these characters think that that particular event is relevant to what's going on now? It's a completely arbitrary event to start asking questions about, and just because Guinan was on the same ship with this guy doesn't mean she knows him. Second, all of the information they just received was given to them by Beverly, who briefs all of the senior officers on this in sick bay. I guess the meeting room was just being painted or something. Way to give all the characters screen time in ways that make no sense, guys. So Picard goes to question Guinan about this arbitrary event, and here's what we find out. The energy ribbon that destroyed the ships is actually a doorway to a magical land with fairies and elves. If you go there, you will be in absolute bliss for eternity, given anything you want, and you will never want to leave. She and Soren apparently experienced this when being sucked up into this thing when they were on the L'Cool, but then they were beamed out of it again.
I would have done anything to get back there. And once I realized that was impossible, I learned to live with that.
Okay, why is it impossible? How is it possible that it's impossible if you got in once? Well, Soren doesn't seem to think that it's impossible because he's still trying to get in. So Picard goes to investigate what him destroying the star has to do with any of this. Then we cut to a scene on board the Klingon ship, and it turns out that Soren is working with the Duras sisters, which, once again, will mean nothing to anyone who hasn't seen TNG. The film doesn't even try to explain who these two are. Soren apparently promised them the trilithium weapon in exchange for stealing trilithium from the Romulans. But the Romulans came looking for it, and that's why they attacked the station, yada yada yada, get on with this. So as if they haven't wasted enough time in this mess, we then cut to a completely pointless scene that is designed, once again, to both run out the clock and give another character some more screen time. I'm serious, look how much time they managed to suck dry out of this scene.
It's not very stylish, though, is it? Have you ever considered a prosthesis that would make you look a little more, how can I say, more normal?
What's normal?
What's normal? Well, that's a good question. Normal is what everyone else is, and you are not.
Can we just get down to it, please?
What do you want? As you may or may not be aware, I am an Elorian. Some people call us a race of listeners. We listen. Right now, Mr. LaForge, you have my complete attention. I want to listen to everything you know about trilithium.
Yes, I want you to tell me everything you know about trilithium. You know, that stuff that I just made a weapon out of, which I just tested, and it worked. I want to listen to everything you know about everything I know. So the film then punts back to the Enterprise, and this next scene is one that I will never forget. If you ever watch this film again, remember it well.
Captain's log, stardate 48632.4. Dr. Crusher has informed me that Data's emotion chip has been fused into his neural net and cannot be removed. However, she believes he is fit for duty, so I've asked him to join me in stellar cartography.
The reason I will never forget this scene is this. I never actually got to watch this film in the theater. I saw it for the first time on home video. And this was the precise moment in the film where I stopped the damn thing and came back to it 2 days later because I was so fucking bored. Honestly, what the hell has happened in this film so far? Well, when you skip the corners they cut in running out the clock and condense the relevant events in this film down to their elements, this is all that has happened. Picard learns his family's dead, Data got emotions, and Soren is doing things for reasons. Now, keeping this in mind, I want to make one thing clear. The movie is almost over. This is it. We've only got about 20 minutes left, and the only thing we know so far is that someone is going to do something, somewhere, in some place, at some time, for some reason. And it's at this point when you realize, or at least you should, that this film is just plain not about anything. What has this film been about so far? What's this secret door for? Oh, it's so Soren can try to get into the Nexus. Why did the Romulans attack the station? Oh, because they're looking for the stolen trilithium Soren is using to get into the Nexus. Why would he destroy a star? To get into the Nexus. The bulk of this film has been spent with these people talking about the Nexus. Hey, guess what, guys? The Nexus is not a story! The Nexus is just a plot device designed to give two characters screen time. Why did you bother putting this on the big screen if you didn't have a story to tell? Well, in the meantime, we still don't know how Soren plans to get into the Nexus, but we're about to find out. Data and Picard pore over the data of what changed after the Amargosa star was destroyed. And if it wasn't apparent that these three television writers don't know how to write a film, it will be now.
The destruction of the Amargosa star has altered the gravitational forces throughout this sector. As a result, any ship passing through this region would have to make a minor course correction.
A minor course correction. Where's the ribbon now?
This is its current position.
Can you project its course?
Captain.
No! You don't stop mid-sprint in an exposition like this to deal with Data's personal issues. He was just about to tell us what was going on. I mean, you haven't wasted enough time in this movie? You have to put the brakes on the actual film again? Data feels bad that he couldn't save Geordi because he was scared, and he asks to be deactivated so he doesn't have to feel remorse anymore. That's what caused them to bring this film to a screeching halt once again. Now, to be fair, this is the only moment in the film that they try to seriously deal with Data's emotions, but the problem is, it's in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it's inane. Data leaving Geordi behind is not that bad. It's understandable considering he doesn't know how to deal with emotions yet, and Geordi being captured is so recent and meaningless that we just can't care about it. So the whole scene is not only holding up our actually learning what's going on, but it's also completely meaningless. Now, here's my idea for a scene dealing with Data's emotions. Geordi puts the chip in, and Data returns to his quarters where he looks around at all of his possessions to see how he feels about them for the first time. He rummages through his belongings when he accidentally finds a picture of Tasha Yar. For the first time in his existence, Data has to feel real grief over his fallen comrade and love interest, and then he goes to Picard and asks to be deactivated. That would at least have had a meaning and substance that's actually related to something the audience cares about. Giving Data something meaningful to feel wouldn't have been that hard, but instead they just chuck whatever at him in an arbitrary place, and his emotions are still not related to this film. Get the hell on with this! So finally they get back to business, and the two realize that Soren destroying the stars changes the gravitational forces in the whole sector.
Why would he try to change its path? Why doesn't he just fly into it with a ship?
Our records show that every ship which has approached the ribbon has either been destroyed or severely damaged.
He can't get to the ribbon.
Why can't he get to the ribbon? He can get to the ribbon. He did get to the ribbon. I've never seen anything like this in my whole life. The people writing this movie are trying to convince us of two completely contradictory things. On the one hand, that no one can get into this thing, and on the other hand, that Soren is trying to get back into this thing.
Our records show that every ship which has approached the ribbon has either been destroyed or severely damaged.
So what? Kirk was standing at ground zero when the ribbons slammed into the ship, and he got into the Nexus, and Soren got into the Nexus too. That's how he knows what it is and why he wants to get back there. So we've already established that the ship's being destroyed or severely damaged has no bearing on people getting into this thing. So what the hell is going on here? The answer is, dude, fuck you. This is the part where the impossible seems to have happened. Something that has already completely fallen apart falls apart even more. A lot more. The chunk of the movie that I am about to discuss is simply mind-boggling. How could something go so horribly, horribly wrong on purpose or on accident? They can't even get the smallest detail to click or make sense between this moment in the film and the moment where Picard and Soren go into the Nexus. You almost have to take a step back in awe over the tremendous amount of shit flying at you at every horrible second that is the third act of Star Trek Generations. To put how bad this is in perspective, this review was originally going to be only 3 parts. However, in writing out everything wrong with this hunk of the film, I was forced to split it up into 4. There were just so many problems to go through that one video simply cannot hold it all. So here's what we ultimately find out. Soren is going to the planet Beridian 3 and plans to destroy the sun with his trilithium weapon. This will cause the Nexus to alter course so much that it will graze the planet and suck him up, but will also have the unfortunate side effect of destroying all the planets in the system. And while Beridian 3 is uninhabited, Beridian 4 has 230 million people living on it. As soon as this is learned, the Enterprise sets course for the Beridian system. So after a long stretch of time in which nothing has been at stake in this movie, we finally have something at stake. 230 million anonymous people that we don't know or care about. Sure, I'd rather not have an entire planet full of people destroyed, but come on. I've never seen them or their world, and I've spent most of this film not knowing they existed or were in jeopardy. So if you think I'm going to be fully invested in their rescue, think again. So the Enterprise arrives at Beridian 3, where they know the Klingon ship is around somewhere.
Klingon vessel. We know what you're doing, and we will destroy any probe launched toward the Viridian Star. We demand that you return our chief engineer and leave this system immediately.
Oh, and we also demand that you hand over the trilithium weapon so you can't blow up solar systems anymore, and you're all under arrest for the theft of trilithium, destruction of a Federation outpost, and assault on Federation officers. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's what someone who wasn't retarded would have done. So here comes Worf to tell us what's going on. Now, as you all know, Worf's character exists to do one of 2 things, either to pontificate or to be publicly humiliated at every opportunity. Well, since there's nothing to humiliate him about in this scene, looks like we're in for the former.
Sir, according to my calculations, a solar probe launched from either the Klingon ship or the planet's surface will take 11 seconds to reach the sun. However, since we do not have an exact point of origin, take us between 8 and 15 seconds to lock our weapons onto it.
You do have an exact point of origin. You just said what it was. It's gonna come from either one of 2 places, the Klingon ship or the planet's surface. But apparently, this Galaxy-class starship, the flagship of the Federation, can be transformed into an alien society, fight off legions of Borg, and even create a whole new life form, but it can't lock half the weapons on the ship and the other half on the planet. So after this, the crew begin to behave in such a way that you would never believe 230 million people were at stake here. Since they're not totally confident that they can shoot down the probes, their next best idea is to somehow get to Soren so they can talk to him. And you won't believe how they go about trying to pull that off.
Lersor, it is very important that I speak with Soren.
I'm afraid the Doctor is no longer aboard our ship.
Then I will beam to his location.
The Doctor values his privacy. He would be quite upset if an armed away team interrupted him.
Then I will beam to your ship and you can transport me to Soren.
Can't trust them. For all we know, they killed Geordi. They might kill you too.
We did not harm your engineer. He's been our guest.
Then return him.
In exchange for what?
Me, sir.
Me. I will be your prisoner. But first, you must beam me to the surface so that I can speak with Soren.
The captain would make a much more valuable hostage.
We'll consider it a prisoner exchange.
Agreed.
What the hell just happened here? He's gonna beam to their ship and be their prisoner, but not before they're nice enough to send him wherever he wants to go? Why would they do that? Picard has no leverage over them. Nothing binds them to this. And I just love how Picard instantly offers to go to their ship so they can beam him down, as if that's the next logical step or something. That's stupid. There's an entire world of people at stake here, and you're gonna put their well-being and your own well-being in the hands of the Duras sisters just so you can try to talk to this guy? I'm sorry, but Picard is completely incapable of this level of incompetence. He would never suggest something like this, and the Duras sisters would never follow through on it. But hey, guess what? They don't. Picard, in fact, never sets foot on the Klingon ship, thereby rendering this whole mess a completely irrelevant waste of time.
Receiving the coordinates, Captain.
Energize.
Okay, there we go. Endgame. You just heard what he said. They have coordinates to the planet. Now they can beam anyone they want down to the surface to go and stop Soren, and there's no reason for Picard to go down there alone. Now, I know at this point a lot of people are grinding their teeth in frustration over what I said. They didn't get the coordinates to the planet, they got coordinates to the Klingon ship, and they beamed Picard down. Wrong! Well, that doesn't look like a Klingon transporter to me. And we've already distinguished between Federation and Klingon transporters here, so it's made absolutely clear that Picard has beamed down from the Enterprise, not the Klingon ship. They have coordinates to the planet. Whether or not that was intended by the writers, that's what they ended up putting in their film. But wait, it gets better. This also means that whatever idiot that was managing the transporter that day also removed his phaser and his communicator, the two most important things anyone needs to stop a mad scientist. Now, let me take some time out in the interest of fairness here. Maybe there was just a gap in communication between the writers and the special effects guys. Maybe when the scene called for a transporter effect, the writers just weren't specific enough. That's not the point. The point is, no one is paying attention to this thing. And you know why? Because no one cares. This is not a movie to these people. It's just one long excuse to give Kirk and Picard screen time, and they don't care how that's done. So what if this is a jumbled, shallow, storyless mess that makes no sense? It'll get the job done, right? This is just one more example of how these people are writing their film. Where Picard is beaming down from is no small detail. It makes no sense if he's beaming down from the Klingon ship, but it makes even less sense if he's beaming down from the Enterprise. Someone had to have seen this error, and when they did, they apparently said, it's good enough, whatever. So Picard tries to talk Soren out of blowing up the star, but lo and behold, someone who has already convinced himself that it's worth sacrificing 230 million people to get into this thing isn't swayed by a 2-minute conversation. And after failing to talk him out of this, Picard then resorts to Plan B. Doing nothing. Absolutely butt-fuck nothing. For the rest of the time, he simply parks his ass on a big rock until he conveniently notices a hole in the force field. That's so brain-dead, I'm not even going to comment on it. I'll leave it to your own common sense to realize why that doesn't work. But the point is, this is Picard's plan for stopping a man who's about to commit genocide. Talk him to death, and when that doesn't work, have a seat and wait for something to happen. Starfleet's finest at work, ladies and gentlemen. Now, a lot of people who have heard this complaint from me have asked what I thought Picard should do, and my response has always been the same. Isn't it obvious? Soren is on an uninhabited planet and is about to take the lives of 230 million innocent people. The solution? Nuke the planet. I'm sorry, but he's given you no choice. Or failing that, why don't they just try to find another way to get him into the Nexus?
I spent 80 years looking for another way. Believe me, this is the only one.
Well, that's funny, Mr. 300-year-old scientist, because I thought of about 50 different ways you could have done it in the last 10 minutes. And that's using any logic this thing could possibly work off of. A lot of Star Trek fans have posited that it's the warp core of the ships that causes the ribbon to go apeshit whenever you go in. So park a solar-powered ship in front of it and wait for it to suck you up. Others have suggested that the very act of being in a ship puts you at risk. Well, we saw that the ships can endure quite a beating before they're destroyed, and we know the transporters work inside this thing, so take a ship in, and while it's being banged up, just transport yourself into it. But of course, we keep on cycling back to the same obvious point. The Nexus isn't supposed to make sense, the plot isn't supposed to be existent, the movie isn't supposed to have a story. Everything in the film is just at the absolute convenience of getting Kirk and Picard a few minutes of screen time. So back up on the ship, we learn that Soren put a camera in Geordi's visor, and the Klingons are now monitoring everything that he's seeing. Data comes and apologizes for not coming back for him, and Geordi assures him that it's fine, that he in fact acted human. Data reacts to this in a way that is so irritating and disrespectful to the character that I won't even mention it here. So later on, Geordi goes down to engineering, and the Duras sisters acquire the Enterprise shield modulation. Once they have this, they start blowing the hell out of the Enterprise. Now, first of all, how many times have we seen these people overcome a problem like this by remodulating the shields? A little magic remodulation has saved them a countless number of times, and yet it is never called for once here. Second, why are the Duras sisters wasting time shooting at the Enterprise? They have the trilithium weapon. Why don't they just go conquer the Klingon Empire with it? Oh, that's right, Soren coded the information they need to make the weapon, and he wouldn't give it to them until he was on the surface. Well, guess what? He's been on the surface for a good 10 minutes now. But then he did order them to eliminate the Enterprise, so maybe he was withholding it until that happened. Well, once again, there are problems with this. First, it baffles me why the Duras sisters would go out of their way to protect this guy at all, considering the first thing we saw him do was kick one of their asses. Second, couldn't they just tell him that they destroyed the Enterprise and ask for the code? I mean, how is he going to know anyway? But the third, final, and biggest problem I have is this. So the Duras sisters can fire through the Enterprise shields. So what? The ship they have is 20 years old. Why doesn't the Enterprise just blow the hell out of it? Honestly, how hard could it be to take this thing down if they're firing everything they've got at them?
They have found a way to penetrate our shields.
Lock phasers and return fire.
Oh, that didn't work. Everyone stopped shooting. Well, they eventually come up with a convoluted way to bring down the ship's shields, and even though Riker called for a spread of photon torpedoes, we see that they've only fired one. Uh-oh, here comes a photon torpedo. Oh, no one take evasive action or anything. We'll just float here and die. Wow, that worked about as well as a barrage of torpedoes would have in the first place! After the Klingon ship is destroyed, the Enterprise recoils under the damage it's taken. Eventually everyone realizes, much like this movie, that the ship is simply unsalvageable, and they have to abandon it before the warp core breaches. Oh crap, the warp core is gonna breach? Well, I guess that means the planet's fucked then. But no, of course not. This is Star Trek Generations. Logic has no meaning here. They get everyone into the saucer section, and the warp core that is breached produces the smallest explosion in the history of warp core breaches, destroying nothing, and ultimately causing no more damage than to shake up the saucer section a little. Yeah, because that makes sense, considering the activation of a core breach is what they use to self-destruct the ship! So then the ship crashes onto the planet, and here again is another example of the good old run-out-the-clock strategy that has been so prevalent in this film. I'm serious, look how much time they managed to suck dry out of this scene. You know what, forget it, I don't even want to sit through that again. I'll just tell you how much time they suck out of this scene. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Yes, I timed it. So down on the planet, Picard managed to get through Soren's force field, but Soren kicks his ass. We then see Soren's little bottle rocket has magically gotten to the sun in 11 seconds and everyone is screwed. The Shockwave heads to the planet, but the Nexus, which will destroy ship after ship but apparently leaves a planet untouched, sucks both of them up just before the destruction. We have now come to realize that this movie is not a movie. It is nothing more than a waste of time that serves as an excuse to give two characters a few minutes of screen time. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. This had better be good. The ending of Star Trek Generations is something I've already discussed in another video I made entitled Star Trek Generations: The Crappy Ending. Now, it's my first video, so the audio quality is a little rough, but I've posted it here for anyone who wants to see it. I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover there, and I don't really feel the need to add anything to it. So instead, I'm just going to expand on a few points that were only made briefly there. We find Picard in the Nexus, where his imaginary family is all playing around during Christmas, and eventually his nephew Rene comes to him. But I don't know if they just couldn't convince the actor to come back, or if God forbid he passed away, but either way, it is no fault of theirs that Robert is absent in this scene. Nevertheless, Picard's interactions with his dead nephew is too short and too shallow. He gives him a heartfelt hug, but then sends him on his way to where we never see him again. It always baffled me why they never had Picard have a conversation with him, or maybe somehow have the kid convince Picard that he was in the Nexus. Anything. Just use him for something. But no. After Rene leaves, the film then runs out the clock some more. All that happens for the majority of this scene is that Picard wanders around his house for a long time. And I mean a long time. This is the biggest bathroom break I've ever seen in my life. Instead of using this as an opportunity for us to see how Picard would interact with a family, they just dump them in a scene and have Picard stare aimlessly at the walls. Now, it was established earlier in the film that one of the side effects of being in the Nexus is that you won't want to leave. This happened to Soren, Guinan, and eventually we learned it happened to Kirk as well. So what happens to convince Picard not to stay? Well, nothing. He just snaps out of it for no reason and decides to leave.
Go on. Go on without me.
And that's it. That's all we see of Picard with his family. Now, did they really kill Picard's whole family just to give him something to see at the end of the film? You got it. The resolution of Picard's pain over his family dying should have tied in with the resolution of this film. Instead, Picard just says, on second thought, I'll just leave. What an absolute waste. So after being told that if he leaves the Nexus he can go anywhere in time, Picard decides to go back to when Soren was kicking his ass, rather than back to a point where the planet wasn't going to be destroyed in a matter of seconds, or maybe back far enough to where he could warn his family about that pesky fire that killed them all. In any case, Picard can't do this alone, so he has to recruit the help of Captain Kirk. And here we go. This is the moment we've all been laboring through this convoluted snooze fest for. It's here. They're both finally on screen. So now that these two titans have a moment together, what are they gonna talk about?
Bill, this isn't really your house. This is not your bedroom. This is some kind of...
The temporal nexus, yes, sir.
They're still talking about the Nexus! They got them into a plot device so they could talk about the plot device they're in! Now, even if this film was just one long and convoluted excuse to get these two on screen together, let me make one thing perfectly clear. There is nothing intrinsically uninteresting about the idea of Captain Kirk and Captain Picard interacting with one another. If they had managed to pull this off, it wouldn't have saved the movie at this point, but I could at least have given it credit for being a good portion of the film, kinda like I did with the beginning. But they just fuck this whole thing up. They give Kirk and Picard nothing to bond over, and they give them nothing to talk about. The majority of this scene consists of Picard trying to get Kirk to leave the Nexus and help him to stop Soren. Well, who wants to watch that? Kirk may as well be anyone at this point that Picard is trying to convince to leave. But the biggest problem I have in all this is that Kirk isn't even acting like Kirk. Kirk wouldn't want to stay in a place like this. Living in a fantasy world where he can't do anything real or substantial would do nothing but suck for him. The problem with this part of the film, as it was conceived, is that the roles just should have been reversed. It should have been Picard who wants to stay in the Nexus to have his family, and Kirk should have been the one to convince him to leave. That would have been much more interesting and much more in character for the two. But instead, Picard buzzes around his ear like a mosquito saying, "Hey dude, you're in the Nexus," until Kirk finally lets Picard take the lead and does whatever he wants. Hey, I got news for you, Baldy. If Kirk were in charge when Soren was going to destroy the star in the first place, Soren would have been as dead as any hope of this movie being good, whereas your plan was to sit on the rocks and cry for 20 minutes, and you're going to be the one to lead this charge? Now, I know a lot of people are going to write off what I just said as me doing the TOS good, TNG bad thing, but it's not true. Both the original series and the Next Generation have their own strengths and their own weaknesses. All I'm saying is, if these two particular characters are in a position where something bad is going to happen and action needs to be taken, who's going to take charge in that situation? It's not going to be Picard. So the scene proceeds in the following manner. You need to leave the Nexus. No, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes. Okay, I guess I will. And that's all the interaction we get from these two. About the most meaningful exchange we get out of them is right here.
Captain of the Enterprise.
That's right.
Close to retirement?
I'm not planning on it.
Let me tell you something. Don't.
Okay, thanks, Kirk. He wasn't thinking about retiring. Is this movie about the pains of retirement? Hey, geniuses! How about using something you've actually established in your film for something other than wasting more time? How about having Kirk say to Picard something like, "Oh, you lost a brother and a nephew? Well, I lost a son. Believe me, it never gets any easier, but you've got to do what's right here." Again, just like Data's emotions, giving these two something meaningful to say to each other wouldn't have been that hard. And just like Data's emotions, this whole thing is just an irrelevant waste. But the final nail in the coffin of this scene comes right here. Eventually, Kirk remarks that all he really wants to do is make a difference again, to which Picard responds the following.
Come back with me. Help me stop Soren. Make a difference again.
Now, I always thought that was a pretty patronizing remark to make. Picard isn't listening to what Kirk is saying here. He's not getting any meaning out of it. He just heard that Kirk wants to make a difference, and he tells him he can, just so he can get him out of the Nexus. It would have been like if Kirk said he wanted candy, and Picard replied, "Well, there's plenty of candy on Beridian 3. So eventually these two leave and arrive on the planet. And the end of this film doesn't really fare much better than the rest of it. It's essentially one big stupid fight until Picard locks the clamps on Soren's bottle rocket. Now, as I said, a lot of this was covered in my crappy ending video, so you should really watch that for more detail on what's wrong here. But I want to finally add one last thing. I said in that video that Soren had 3 full seconds to jump out of the way of the explosion. Well, that was me being the most generous that I've ever been in my life. I mean, look at this. Look how much time he had. I could have been off that platform and halfway around that mountain before that thing went off. Eventually, Picard comes onto the now RIP'd Enterprise, and we get the following line.
Someone once told me that time was a predator that stalked us all our lives. But I rather believe that time is a companion who goes with us on the journey, reminds us to cherish every moment, because they'll never come again. What we leave behind is not as important as how we've lived.
You know what this line reminds me of? It reminds me of a kid who half-assed his way through his homework and got a bad grade, so he just threw something together at the last minute for extra credit. They may as well have had Picard say, "See, this movie was about something." Well, no, it wasn't. You can intersperse however many pseudo-philosophical lines you want through this mess, but that doesn't change the fact that the whole thing was boring garbage. Aerosmith is one of my favorite bands. I know you're all like, what does that have to do with anything? But I actually do have a point. You see, in the beginning of their music video days, they made some videos that were, well, terrible. But for their Janie's Got a Gun video, they hired David Fincher, who ironically later went on to direct some really good films. The video was groundbreaking and absolutely fantastic. When interviewed, Joe Perry, the lead guitar player for the band, said something to the following effect: "The best way to do a good music video is to get someone who knows how to do music videos and let him do it." This should have been the strategy going into this film. Do we know what we're doing here? And if not, let's bring someone in who does. Instead, these three just said, well, we'll just do what we did on television. It's the same thing, right? And the answer is, dude, fuck you. And in case I haven't made myself perfectly clear, fuck you, and fuck you.
For those of you who never got around to watching the end of Star Trek Generations, I'm going to sum it up for you right now. Captain Picard finds himself sucked up into the Nexus, and he materializes inside a house. In this house are a bunch of kids that we've never seen before who don't exist, a house that doesn't exist, and a wife that doesn't exist. This goes on for about 15 minutes of Captain Picard just walking around this house that we've never seen before and will never see again. Suddenly, he notices Guinan. But it's not really Guinan, it's not even really Guinan's residual neural energy, it's like her ghost or something. They never really explained that. Anyway, Guinan tells him that he's in the Nexus, but she didn't really have to do that because for no reason, Picard figured it out. Then his kids tell him to do things and build castles with them, and he says, no, I'm not going to stay in the Nexus. Now, we were already informed earlier in the film that if anyone gets sucked up into the Nexus, they won't care about anything but staying in. Somehow Picard breaks that spell. How? God only knows. They never explain it. So Picard says to Guinan, there's this guy that blew up a planet, and I gotta go back and stop him. I beamed down without my phaser or my communicator for no reason, and tried to stop him that way, and he kicked my ass. I don't know why I didn't just send Worf. Worf could have kicked his ass. But nevertheless, can I leave the Nexus? And Guinan says to Picard, if you leave, you can go anywhere, anytime. So Picard says, oh, okay. Well, instead of going back to when I was talking to Soren in 10 Forward, when I had access to weapons and was in full view of 100 people, I think I'll go back to when he was kicking my ass and I only had seconds to save the planet. So, Picard's a wuss and he can't fight, so he asks Guinan, a frilly Elorian girl, to fight his battle for him. Guinan says she can't because she's just a ghost or something, but informs Picard that Kirk's here and to go recruit him. It's at this point that we realize that people can just walk in and out of other people's nexuses whenever they want. So again, instead of just going into everyone's nexus who's in this thing and recruiting a full army to go against Soren, he only goes after Kirk. So up until now it's been pretty boring, but it actually gets worse. Time has absolutely no meaning in the Nexus, we're told, and so that means that there's absolutely no urgency for Picard, Kirk, or anyone else to leave the Nexus and go and save anything. They can hang out there for 1,000,000 years and then go back and stop him. So there's really no reason for us to think, wow, they better hurry this up. And boy howdy do they not hurry it up. Picard finds Kirk chopping wood, even though this is the Nexus, which is supposed to send you to the place that you want to be the most, and doing the thing that you want to do the most. Anyone who knows Kirk knows that he would have been on the bridge of the Enterprise, but he's in an obscure cabin that we've never seen before in our lives. So Kirk and Picard talk about basically nothing for a real long time. Kirk is back at his cabin, and he's talking about Antonia, another woman that we've never met before in our lives, and will never see again after this movie. Why they didn't make it Carol Marcus, or even Edith Keeler, for God's sake, someone who we care about, I'll never fucking know. So anyway, they talk and ride horses. Then, Kirk says, yeah, sure, let's do it your way, Picard. Now, I want to interject something real quick. This really has nothing to do with the movie, but it's of my own personal belief. If it was actually Kirk, and it's not, because no one who knows anything about the character was writing this so-called movie, he would have done this. Okay, Mr. Picard, is it? This Nexus doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So here's what we'll do. You go back to your time, sit on the rocks and cry for another 20 minutes. I'll go back to my time and phaser Soren in the head. Problem solved. But no, they go back to the planet where Soren was just about to win. And that's what they do. They leave. Enter the planet, and they try and stop Soren. Now, if you notice off in the distance, here comes a reset button. And again, there's no urgency to this scene. Even if they don't stop him this time, the Nexus is going to suck him up, they'll be right back in, they can just leave and try to stop him again. They can do this as many times as it takes until they succeed. So they fight. Then finally, Kirk falls off a bridge, or the Kirk and the bridge fall, or something like that. Kirk's nowhere to be found. Picard does some fancy stuff on the computer of this stupid thing, and Soren says, "Get away from the launcher." Soren then goes to the launcher, looks at it, and realizes that the clamps have been locked. So instead of spending the full 3 seconds he had to jump out of the way of the most survivable explosion I've ever seen on film, he just stands there and stares into space like, well, I guess they beat me. So he's dead. Picard goes to Kirk. Kirk doesn't really say anything all that spectacular, and he dies. Picard doesn't take him back to Starfleet for a proper Starfleet Federation burial. He just piles some rocks on him and leaves him on an obscure planet. And why not? I mean, it's only the greatest Starfleet captain who ever lived, right? No big deal. So some rescue ships come, and he and Riker talk about nothing, and then the movie's over. The only thing that we really lost in this film was Kirk, the Enterprise D, and that's really about it. What do we gain? Absolutely nothing.